Now there's all kinds of different people in this world. There's only one pie.
Welcome to the Team Made Apart podcast, the podcast designed to teach freelancers, contractors, and remote workers, really anyone working apart, how to build better relationships with those they work with and those they work for. I'm your host, Ryan Rogar. Before we get started, financial support for the Team Made Apart podcast Season 2 is provided by R2, a fully distributed brand relationship consultancy. R2 has specific expertise and experience in helping service companies grow, develop, and maintain impactful relationships through world-class brand strategy and design. R2 supports the world's best distributed companies by providing valuable insights, strategy, empathy, and tactical expertise to help them foster truly meaningful relationships from top management to top consumer. If the success of your business depends on the relationships you make, then you need R2. To learn more or to request a call, simply visit r2mg.com/podcast. That's r2mg.com/podcast. R2, relationships squared. Also, financial support comes from teammadeapart.com. Leveraging 20 plus years of global agency and creative hiring expertise, Team Made Apart provides distributed organizations with access to the best and brightest creative talent from around the world. Through deep understanding of client needs and meaningful relationships with talent, Team Made Apart facilitates a sort of virtual handshake between prospective employer and prospective employee to reduce risk and eliminate doubt from creative hiring decisions. Take a step towards filling that creative-shaped void in your distributed team by visiting teammadeapart.com/talent. That's teammadeapart.com/talent to learn more. Finally, financial support comes from supporters like you. Members of our Happy Little Podcast community can make contributions directly to the show by visiting teammadeapart.com/podcast and clicking on the donation link. Donations can be in any amount and go a long way towards keeping this show on the air. If you appreciate the work we're doing and would like to get involved, just visit teammadeapart.com/podcast, click the donate button, and you're on your way. Thank you for your continued support. And now, on to the show. Welcome back to the Team Made Apart podcast. Today's special guest is Alistair Davis. Alistair is a voice actor and professional communicator who believes strongly in using the power of our voice to become better leaders, presenters, and negotiators. Alistair's passion lies in teaching professionals how to leverage their voice to make better connections with clients, prospects, and colleagues. In addition to his work as a voice actor, Alistair spends his time coaching entrepreneurs about the many aspects of both verbal and nonverbal communication and helps them hone their voice to achieve more. He does this through his voice and sales training consultancy, Jabba, and also through his very popular podcast, How to Rock Virtual Engagements. Here to talk about selling ourselves and demonstrating confidence, developing our voice, the role of listening in virtual communication, the big 5 factors that make up verbal communication done well, and so much more, please join me in welcoming our guest, Alistair Davis. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Team Made Apart podcast. Today's guest is Alistair Davis. Alistair, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Ryan. Awesome
Absolutely.
to be here.
Yeah, no, I am thrilled to have this conversation. I'm really looking forward to it. As we talked a little bit prior to the taping, your name has come up several times in several remote work circles that I've been in and around. And so I'm really excited to have this conversation.
Me too.
So cool. Well, let's start a little bit at the beginning then. Let's talk a little bit about who you are, where you come from, and what you're doing in the remote work space.
Okay. So I'll tell you the story from the very beginning, which brought me eventually to where I am today. When I was 5 years old, my parents converted to being Jehovah's Witnesses, and I'll explain the relevance of that. And so, from a young age, I was knocking on doors, getting lots of rejection. I think my nose is still flat from all the doors slammed in my face. But that was when I started to understand presenting and talking. And at that time, I was very, very shy. And by the way, I'm no longer a Jehovah's Witness. We're not going to talk about religion, but that was my introduction to speaking and conversing. And it was a difficult transition for me because I was such a shy kid. And then fast forward, worked for Oracle in Dublin, was in the Oracle economy as a salesperson, account executive for 10 years, came back to South Africa, started my own company, did an acting course, and discovered I loved acting. And my agent said to me, "Can you do a voiceover?" And I was like, yeah, sure. Of course I can do a voiceover. And to this day, I still do voiceovers. And after I left my company, I thought, well, what can I do? What can I teach? What am I passionate about? And voice was something that always came up for me, because since a kid, I could also do different accents and impersonations, and being a voice artist, I get paid to do funny characters and funny accents. And so I developed this curriculum around teaching professionals how to have amazing voices. And that's what I kind of sort of started and focused my company around Jabba, because I called it Jabba from the English slang phrase jibber jabber. I don't know if you remember the A-Team. There was B.A. Baracus, and he said, "Quit your jibber jabber." And so I called the company Jabba because it's kind of to do with talking and chatting, and here I am.
No, I love that. No, I think that's really great. It's interesting too that your background is, basically in selling the world's hardest thing to sell. I think it's really interesting out here where I'm at, based in Salt Lake City, Utah. The Mormon church is the strong faith in the area, and they distribute missionaries all over the planet. And these guys, have ended up being the best salespeople I know, or the people who have gone out and worked on a mission and sold their, basically their product, which in this case was religion. And, I think it builds a couple of key characteristics. One is this ability to sort of be resilient, this idea that you can take no for an answer, which is critical when you're a salesperson, and sort of not taking it personally, right? I have a thing to sell, either you want it or you don't. And then I think also, to your point, maybe developing your voice, understanding who you are, what you're communicating, and making sure that you're choosing the right words to communicate well. So honestly, I mean, it's interesting that that's your path is by way of religion. And I've seen that in other people too, but I think that's a crash course in great sales and great communication.
Yeah, no, it was interesting because they taught us to be orators, convincers, because as you said, it's a difficult sell. And your resilience, I think to this day, I just don't give up. It's probably from those days of just getting no.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, those are incredible characteristics, and I mean, to that point, I mean, if you look at people, here in the United States anyway, like the Barack Obamas or the Martin Luther Kings of the world, I mean, these guys are orators, but many of them come from sort of a religious background. They were preachers first or things like that. They become these amazing orators. And so much of it is about being able to communicate using a lot of the techniques that we'll go into in greater depth during this conversation. These ideas of being able to project your voice, or choose the right words and act the right way at the same time so that you're communicating what it is you're actually trying to say, that sort of thing. So I think it's a maybe a background that as a 5 or 6 or 7-year-old you didn't love, but I think in retrospect, as an adult, it's probably paying dividends. Yeah,
for sure.
Well, so let's shift, I guess, a little bit, and let's talk about just sort of developing our voice. Let's understand, I guess, kind of the importance of it. I think on a superficial level, most of us can look at voice and understand that being able to speak is critical and all that stuff. Of course, now we're in these crazy times where essentially most of our conversations are virtual. And for your run of the mill remote worker, most people are speaking via Zoom or via video chat or whatever, anytime or anyway. And so maybe let's talk a bit about just sort of the importance of voice in communication, and sort of we'll go from there.
Yeah, I think if you think about when we're babies, babies make sounds, and they make the psychologists and the doctors still don't know, but they presume that the babies make a lot of vowel sounds like ga, ga, ah, ah, ah when they start. And the vowel sounds are the communicators of emotion. And the consonants obviously are the things in between. But if you think about you think about your favorite song right now, and you think about the chorus, it's usually vowel heavy. I mean, you think about Hey Jude, na, 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 na. And so voice has a very strong emotional context to it. It has a very strong emotional communication aspect to it. And there was this research done by Professor Albert Mehrabian, which people often refer to. It's still accepted today. It's widely communicated, often misunderstood. But he was an Iranian professor, and he moved to the States in the 70s. And he did this research on how our nonverbal stimuli communicate our feelings and our attitudes. And he said that when we communicate with each other, we have the visual stimuli, in other words, how we look, our body posture, eyes, the clothes we wear, our hair. We have the tonal stimuli, in other words, how we sound, and the actual words we use. And those three things together make up how we communicate our non-verbal things, or our feelings, our attitudes, our emotions. And he did some experiments, and he assigned a percentage of influence to each one of these three. And he came up with percentages. 55% of the visual stimuli communicate attitudes and feelings, 38% tonal, and 7% words. So in other words, if you can't see somebody, you've got the tone and you've got the words. And the tone is the thing that's going to really communicate attitudes and feelings. And as intelligent humans or intelligent animals, we understand those slight tonal variations, and we can pick up on them and go, I don't know about this Ryan guy. Or,
no,
hey,
it's so true. Well, and it's funny because we don't think about it, but it is so true.
Yeah. I mean, your mother can phone you and she'll go, or your friend or your dad or whoever it is, and they just say, Ryan, and you go, uh-oh, what's wrong? What's up? Because you know that tone, or the way she said or he said that particular word or your name, and you can pick it up. And so we, get used to these ways of communicating. We can pick up on these stimuli, on these emotions. And the emotional part is the thing that is the connector, right? So as professionals, as remote workers, we need to connect. We need to connect. And if you can get the connection and the trust and the likability and all of those cool, fuzzy, feely things, then you're off to the races. And people go, oh, cool. Well, I want to do business with you, or, this is awesome. But if you come on your call and you're like, how's it going? Yeah, what a great day. So happy to talk to you. Your audience are going to switch off.
Yeah, no, it's true. And it's funny how much of it is just sort of instinctual. We understand how people are thinking, or what they're thinking, or how they're behaving based on what they say, what they do, and sort of the way they move around. And so it is interesting. I also like, the point that you made about just sort of how much of our communication, is based on sort of body language and things like that. And how now in sort of a remote work world, or in this world where we're, doing a lot of our communication virtually, we basically have lost, a large piece of our ability to communicate well. And so now maybe it's become more important than ever to be, hyper efficient, or you become very, great communicators on the small, percentage we have left, that visual and tonal part, or the words and the tonal part. So maybe it makes sense to talk about this at this point, back to this idea of selling, going door to door and overcoming those things. I mean, as a child, maybe it's not as big an issue, but as an adult, for a lot of us, we have a hard time developing the confidence to go out and do those sorts of things. And so much of our communication, as we're talking about tone and all these things, if we're not confident, it's communicated in one form or another, whether it's the words we choose, or the trepidation we have, or the way that we're sunk in our shoulders, or whatever it is we're doing. And so can you talk a little bit about sort of overcoming fear and developing confidence as it pertains to speaking in, either a one-on-one setting or in a group?
Yeah, sure. I think that the first thing that you need to think about, the pre-speaking objective, as it were, is a couple of pre-speaking objectives that you would need. And the first one is to control and reduce your anxiety. Because if you can control and reduce your anxiety, then that's half the battle won. And the way you're going to do that is through some kind of breathing exercises. And if you've done meditation or yoga or any of those things, it's a factor of breathing in, holding the breath, and then breathing out, those three, and repeating that cycle before you go on stage, before you do your presentation. So there's that. there's obviously practice. You need to practice your presentation. And the best way to do that is recording yourself with your smartphone, putting your smartphone somewhere and just looking at yourself in the mirror. You have to look back at a recording and see what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong. I mean, as actors, that's how actors get better. They do a couple of takes before they send in their self-tape or whatever. So you've got to practice, and I would use your smartphone as the tool to practice. Then once let's say you've practiced and you're super happy with your content and you know it, the first 30 seconds or a minute is what you want to really get down, because if you start the race well, you're going to calm your nerves, because it's that first minute or two is when the heart's beating and you're like, oh shit. but if you've got it, if you know, okay, I've got this, then you're off, then you're fine. But you've got to do the breathing exercise before and the preparation. Then I would say drink lots of water 20 minutes before you start speaking, because it takes about 20 minutes for the hydration to get to your vocal folds. And your vocal folds are going up to 1,000 times per second if you're a female, and up to 500 times per second if you're a male. But that's only if you're hitting the high notes. How we're speaking now, we're probably, I'd guess, 200, 180, 200, 250 hertz as to what we're speaking. But if you're going to be speaking a lot, you need to be hydrated. And if you are stressed and you are not hydrated, your voice will go. And then you will be sounding like this. Because what happens is the tension and the anxiety hits your throat and constricts your larynx. And then that all of those muscles and tendons in your throat sort of freeze up. And then everything falls down.
Yeah, no, I think that's actually a really good point. This idea of, sort of the difference between the mental and the physical preparation. I think so much of being a good speaker or a good orator or showing up prepared to do your work is sort of based on intention, making sure that you have done this sort of pre-speaking, thought process where you're going, okay, well, what I'm trying to get done is X, Y, or Z. And this is what I want to try and do. I think sort of setting your mind in the right frame makes a lot of sense. But it hadn't even occurred to me, this idea of drinking water or whatever. I mean, for me, I have a knack for drinking coffee, so I end up probably talking at a little faster rate than I should. But there's water in coffee, so I feel like I'm still doing the good work. And so,
yeah.
But I do think that that's a critical component that maybe most people don't factor in, is sort of the physical bit as well as sort of the mental part. So I think that's a great observation.
There's another very simple thing that you can do, which is so simple, it's very silly. It's very silly sounding, should we say. Very simple, but it's very, very effective. So I do voiceovers, and sometimes I have to do a voiceover. Sometimes I have to do an American voiceover, and I have to use a US accent to do my voiceover. And I have to use my tongue or, shape my mouth in different ways to pronounce the words. So you have to do that. What you can do to warm up your lips and your tongue and your facial muscles is called the pen in the mouth trick. So you take a pen and you put it in your mouth like a horse's bridle, and you speak like that for about a minute or so. And what it is it's a gym for your mouth, because it's resistance for the tongue, the lips, and the facial muscles. And so when you take the pen out, you will be speaking like the Queen, where you will pronounce your words amazingly well.
We'll suddenly have proper English dialect. So instead of our sloppy American English that we've got over here. So, so let's talk a little bit about sort of developing our voice. So not only from like maybe the physical standpoint, like you were just bringing up, sort of this idea of better enunciation or being able to sort of speak more clearly, but also just like our maybe intangible voice, like understanding how to communicate who we are. I think that there's a component there that, some of it I'm sure boils down to word choice and things like that. But I think a lot of times we're busy playing a role, right? We're trying to be whoever we think we need to be for somebody else. So whether
Yeah.
it's a sales pitch or whatever. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about just sort of, selling ourselves in conversation, even if we're not moving a product or whatever, but how can we come off best?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think I did a training, it was 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. And I said, because I also do acting part-time, although recently I haven't had time for acting. Also, COVID-19 is not a good time if you want to be an actor, because there's nothing happening. So what I said was, Tom Hanks is always Tom Hanks. So you have to come from the place that you will always be you. Don't try and be somebody else. And a saxophone is always a saxophone. You can't change the tone. So your physiology and who you are as Ryan, you cannot change that. But what you could do is you can use your instrument and your voice and the way you are and just use it in a better way. Play the instrument in a better way, because our voices are like an instrument. And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to add a few more notes in your range as a speaker. Because if you can have some more notes, some more higher notes and some lower notes, you're going to be more melodic. So if you're more melodic, plus you can throw in some nice pauses, and you can vary your pitch and your pace and your volume, then you're going to start sounding more interesting. Throw in a bit of warmth when you start the conversation, then you're off to the races. So I think, particularly when we start conversations, that's the golden 20, 30 seconds, If we don't get it right at the beginning, that's when people might switch off or turn away from us, or not. So I don't know about this guy or this lady.
Well, yeah, it's true. It goes back to that old thing, right? The first impressions thing. And so it's this idea that, your first impression is the one that lasts, right? So showing up with, proper intention, proper preparation, being authentic and true to sort of who you are and what you're, meaning to communicate. I think, yes, of course, that sort of sets you up for success for future conversation or for the rest of that one.
Yeah, exactly. The simplest thing that you could do, when I talk about the voice and tips and tricks, it's something that if you really want to get it right, you're going to have to do some coaching and, understand where you are on the spectrum of speaking and what you can improve. But you can do what I call a 20% smile. So when I do voiceovers, particularly when you start the voiceover, the producer will say something like, "Can you give me 20% smile?" And in a professional context, that's what you want. You want just a little bit of warmth. So when you start your introduction or you introduce yourself as Ryan or Alistair, what you're looking for is that slight bit of warmth and an extra little few decibels of volume and some melody. And I'll tell you what melody is later on, but I'll give you a demo. So if I introduce myself like this, this would be a bad way of introducing myself. "Hey Ryan, how's it going? It's Alistair. I'm from Jabba. Yeah, really cool to be really happy to be talking today. Yeah, it's going to be so cool. But how's about this? Hey Ryan, it's Alistair. How's it going? Yeah, really cool to be talking today. I'm going to be, so happy to be here with you, and it's going to be awesome." I don't know if you heard the tonal difference there.
Yeah, no, what's interesting is just trying to be sort of conscious of the difference. Like I actually felt myself, not well up like in tears, but I could actually feel my energy level lift when you came back with the second round, right? When you come back and you're showing the teeth and all that stuff, I could actually feel a sort of a physiological change, right? It's the difference between talking to, I don't know, the well-spoken CEO versus, your stoner neighbor. And, and so, but I mean, the emotion, so not even just in what you're saying, I mean, essentially you said the same thing, but the difference in how you said it made a physiological impact on the way I felt. And so I think that's, to your point, or sort of to take this to the next step, it's that idea, right? When you get in front of an audience, whether virtually like we're doing now or in person, this ability to sort of approach it with that gets everybody immediately engaged. They all will feel that lift, and everybody will get involved in this conversation, and suddenly we're in.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And totally. And the smile, the 20% smile affects the tone, but it's also a physical indicator of likability. It's a physical indicator of saying, I want to be here. And you don't have to do the full Joker smile because that's probably a bit over the top. But it's the slight smile. It's the little bit of warmth that goes such a long way. And you add a bit of volume, bit of melody, and it just pops. It just announces you in such a different way. And the other trick as well is your name. You know, obviously you're a brand name as well. Your company and your name is a brand name. So you can't go, hi, it's Alistair Davis here for Jabba. You know, there has to be some kind of differentiation or some kind of a pop of the brand name Alistair and Jabba. So yeah, I think the best proponent of this is, my name's Bond, James Bond. You know, it's that, it's that, you don't go, my name's Ryan Rogar, but you do give a little bit of a, you know, differentiation to your name and your surname and a gap there.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And, you know, also just, I mean, the ability, I guess, to sort of bring people in through these sort of, I guess, subconscious things is probably one of the more critical parts. You know, as you mentioned, you know, earlier, this idea of sort of our visual stimulation, which is limited now to facial expression and maybe the occasional waving hand. But outside of that, you know, that tonal stuff, you know, and being able to sort of see your smile, I mean, immediately pulls you into the conversation. And that's not something that you can really fake, you know, like, I mean, you could sort of, I guess, in a vacuum, have a conversation where, you know, maybe we could kind of pick up in our tone that you were happy and that you were having a good time to be there. But that extra layer of being able to see it, I think, is so critical.
Yeah, totally.
So a couple of things that you touched on there that I'd like to unpack a little bit. First is sort of this idea of self-assessment. We talked a little bit about, you know, maybe recording yourself on your phone and being able to sort of listen to it. But I think it makes a lot of sense to understand sort of a baseline of where you are. Are there tools out there for sort of understanding where we are in the spectrum of ability to communicate?
Yep. So there are a number of apps out there, like Amo. There's an app called Orai, O-R-A-I, which is a cell phone app which will record you, and only in English. So all of the apps are only in English, which is the only downside, but I guess most people use English in their international business. And so what it does is it records your speed in words per minute, your filler words, your, like I said, basically, you know, and a factor of your melody or energy and your pauses. So if we take a step back and say, okay, well, we don't have that app, we don't want to pay for the app, we want to do it, you know, on our own, record a minute of your conversation and see how it sounds. There's a expression in sound engineering, if it sounds good, it is good. But what you're looking for is filler words, the ums, the ahs, the likes, the so, basicallys, those, and then we're looking at the speed in words per minute. So for a minute of speech, you should be hitting about 150 to 160 words. That's kind of good speaking. That's a good speaking speed. Then some pauses. There should be some pauses in there. And then there should be melody or vocal prosody. Now, vocal prosody is the singy-songy melody type description of speech. That's a little bit more difficult to measure. But if you can think of melody as the complete opposite to monotony. So if you're going to speak like this, and a lot of people, you know, when they get on their calls, they might speak like this, and you know, that's how we speak. And you know, maybe if they're a bit excited, they might go up a little bit, but it's kind of flat lines. That's monotony. That's what you don't want.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, it's what about music we enjoy, right? It's the ups and
Yeah.
downs and the emotional roller coaster you're on as you listen to your favorite song, because you're being pulled in and brought up and pulled down and, sped up or slowed down and, the way that our body reacts to these different sounds. So it makes a lot of sense that, in your voice, it would be the same. And,
Yeah.
back to your idea or your point about sort of the rate at which we're speaking, if we're speaking in that 160, 180 word per minute range, generally speaking, we're able to sort of hear and process at a rate around 500 words per minute. So that sort of sweet spot there of about 200 words a minute, gives us all the time we need, or sort of all the brain bandwidth we need to actually hear what you're saying and process it. So if you get into a mode where you're speaking, I mean, I don't know how fast speech is, but I mean, like at my rate, if I'm going, 250 or 300 words per minute, I guess, I don't know what's fast, but, but I could understand that it might get infinitely more difficult to process or more difficult to understand, because you're going so quickly that we can't even assign meaning to what you're saying at the rate you're saying it.
Yeah, I think the other point as well, by the way, 200 words a minute is too quick. It's way too quick. But it's fine here's the thing. The average should be 140 to 180. It depends who you speak to, but 140 to 180 is kind of the accepted norm of good speech. But at some point you could be speaking at 180 words per minute, that's fine. And at some points you're going to be getting down to 140. But the point is you need to vary it. It has to be a variance. It can't be the same. You have to be sonically different and interesting and keep your audience guessing. But the other point I wanted to make was that in a virtual context, what we have is some latency between a headset, a Bluetooth headset, or a wired headset going into Zoom, through the internet, going to a listener and a receiver. There is latency or a delay. So you need to factor that in as well in terms of how you are speaking and communicating. Because if you're on the higher end of the scale, then things are lost in translation in terms of the back and forth of the speech. If you're wanting to, talk and have a tennis match in terms of a conversation, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, I mean, exactly. And, even in this conversation, for example, I've caught myself stepping on you a couple times. And I think a big part of that is this latency. Obviously, you're in South Africa, I'm in sunny Utah. And, so, I mean, we've got some distance between us, and just, this is a shortcoming of technology, right? I mean, we're trying to basically cross the planet using our, Ethernet cables or whatever. And unfortunately, latency is a very real problem. And, there's so many factors involved in that. But I think recognizing it as part of the way that we're communicating, will allow us to be a little more intentional or thoughtful about the way we talk.
Yeah. Yeah. And in terms of latency, wired is always best. I like a Bluetooth headset. I like to walk and talk. I do like to walk and talk, I must admit. But if you want the best sound fidelity or the best connection, wired is best always.
Yeah, it makes sense. So one other topic I wanted to sort of touch on, just while we're talking about sort of this idea of self-assessment and how do we know where we are. I think one thing that keeps so many people, I mean, for somebody like you who's been doing this for some time, it's very easy to sit down, record yourself on the phone and just go with it. I think so many of us hate the sound of our own voice. Do you have any idea what that means, or like why do we react so negatively to that? Because I think that a lot of times that's what keeps us from trying to improve is, we just don't want to go back and hear ourselves. We don't like, I mean, you hear that from everyone, right? Oh, I don't like the way I sound on microphone. I don't like the way I sound.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, do you have any thoughts about sort of overcoming that? Like, how do we get around that bit so that we can just record ourselves sort of dispassionately and be objective in what we're hearing?
Yeah, that comes up always. I think we all need to understand that we hear ourselves in our heads because there's certain resonance that's happening when we speak. So we sound more bassy to ourselves, if you understand, because we've got the resonance system in our head, and the sound is going out, and it's also being bounced off certain surfaces, so there's a bit of reverb going on. So we hear ourselves as much better much deeper or much more, just more resonant. Whereas if you put yourself on a phone, it's going in almost 2D, if I can use the word 2D. And that's why it sounds tinny. It doesn't sound so good. But the point is, we all sound the same. I mean, the point is we all have, excuse me, we all have those voices, and that's the voice we have. And our audience doesn't hear the voice we're hearing. Do you understand?
Mm-hmm.
So we think we sound this way, but the audience is like, but Ryan, you've always sounded like that. That's you.
Yeah.
But you're like, no, that's not me. I sound different because in my head, I've got more resonance and more bassiness. No, but that's you, Ryan. So I think that's the first point. That's how you sound. And secondly, the more you do it, the more you record, the easier it will become. And it's just, that's how it is. I hate looking at myself on camera. And it's just like, okay, well, whatever.
Yeah, no, it's funny. It took me a long time to sort of realize that. In addition to this podcast, I do another one. And so with that show and all these combined, I mean, we're well into the hundreds of episodes. And, but it took a long time. And honestly, I can sort of point to parts of my experience where I feel like I've turned a corner. Like I get to the point where suddenly I don't care about how I sound, or suddenly I don't, care that much about how I look on video. I'm sort of naturally introverted. So, I mean, getting on video and speaking out loud are like two things that I would not want anything to do with, like on a given day, if given the choice otherwise. But as I guess sort of putting on my big boy pants, if I'm going to do this, it's necessary to get on camera and it's necessary to hear my voice. And it just kind of is what it is. Usually I don't go back and listen to myself again. I still try and avoid it. But generally speaking, I have come to terms with the fact that, sometimes we must do things that we don't love. So even if you don't like the sound of your voice, it's still critical in getting better to actually hear yourself speak.
Yeah, totally.
So the next thing I wanted to sort of transition into is this idea of sort of the tools of the trade and what kinds of communication to use when. So I think, especially in the context of remote work, we're trying to understand how better to communicate with people, across cultures or across, geographies, whatever it is. And so can we talk a little bit about sort of, the tools, or the different things we might throw in our quiver that could help us, become master communicators, virtually?
Yeah, sure. I think, as I said before, if we look at the conversation life cycle, if we compress the conversation life cycle of introduction, middle, and end, to simplify it, it's just simplify things for now. When you're introducing yourself is going to be different to when you're trying to sell or convince or overcome objections. So when you introduce yourself, definitely you need to be warmed up. You need to have your water. You need to have intent. You need to have energy. You got to have that 20% smile, critical smile, 20% smile, and a thing called melody or vocal prosody. Now, melody happens when you have the variation of your pitch, pace, and volume. And the simplest way to do that, to get melody into your speech, in other words, to not be monotonous, is to vary your speaking pace as much as you can. Because what happens is the faster you speak, your pitch rises and your volume increases slightly. It's these micro variations of pitch and volume increase. And the slower you speak, generally what happens is the volume decreases and the pitch drops, right? So when you start your conversation, you want 20% smile, extra volume, and some melody to set the tone. Hey, I'm happy. Really cool to be on this virtual meeting with you, or this Teams meeting, the Zoom meeting, whatever it is you're using as your platform. And you build that connection. And then when it's time to say, okay, well, let's get down to business, there's a couple of things you could do. Be a good idea to perhaps reduce your speed a little bit, slightly. Allow gaps between your value points or your propositions. So if you have a slide and let's say there's 4 or 5 points on the slide, you're going to get to your customer or your clients and say, okay, here's the meat and potatoes. of what we're talking about, right? We have feature 1, feature 2, feature 3, and feature 4. So you want the gaps between the points because the gaps create a bit of tension, they create anticipation, and you want anticipation and you want tension when you're trying to get some points across. Anticipation, tension, a bit of something where the audience goes, "Ooh, what's he going to say next? Oh, this is cool."
Yeah. Well, and you see that when you look at like the keynote presentations from like Apple, for example. They do these really dramatic talks, and they kind of lead up to something, and then kind of let you hang there for like just a split second, and then it's, oh yeah, the new iPhone or whatever.
Yeah.
Let me introduce XYZ product. And so,
Yeah.
but that's exactly what they're doing, right? They're sort of building this tension. They're building an energy up to the grand, announcement of whatever it is they're trying to say. And by doing that, it brings us into the conversation. It makes us a little bit more engaged.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if you're going to do a story, if you're going to start with a story, then maybe you might want to drop your tone a bit if you can. Slow down and tell the story about the boy and the bear walking in the forest. Now, this is a story I like to tell everyone. So you can, that is for male and female. You can drop your tone, what they call a drop larynx, or speaking down. If you can get down to the lower frequencies, what you're doing is you're creating space at the back of your throat, dropping your larynx. With practice, you can definitely do this. This is something that people can do. I don't know if you recall the old British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher.
Mm-hmm.
There's these videos, I'll send them to you after the show. There's these videos of her on YouTube where when she got into politics, she was very happy to be in politics because she is a lady from London and she's very happy. And then after a while, she dropped her tone and she spoke like this. And she became a little bit more assertive in the way she sounded because she trained her voice. And you can do that. With a bit of practice, you can definitely bring in the lower frequencies, which are generally accepted as being more dominant.
Yeah. Okay. So also, just as it pertains to presentation, one of the things that, we've talked about a little bit, but I would like to maybe extrapolate on is this idea of sort of choosing our words and then hitting them at the right time. So I have a real knack for, hitting the wrong word and making the one thing that's, 4 words ahead of what I actually should be hitting more important than the thing that I'm hitting. And so, yeah. I mean, are there tips and tricks like in and around that idea? Like, do we always, elevate at the end of a sentence, for example, or I mean, like, are there sort of tips for when you should hit the words or how to choose the word that you hit so that you can sort of deliver maximum impact?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the adjectives and describing words are the ones that you want to have color with. So I want to show you this. I want to tell you this amazing thing that I really think you should understand. So getting into a habit of describing the words, and if you're going to prepare your presentation, make sure that you're going to practice the couple of adjectives, your go-tos. If you're starting out and you're struggling with this, then, just keep 5 or 6 in your back pocket and keep those as your aces. When they come up, you're going to make sure that you say amazing, whatever. Obviously, you can't say amazing all the time because it's going to sound weird. But have those in your back pocket. There's also connectives like therefore, however. In short, what we were saying was, these kinds of phrases are also connectives that kind of push the conversation in a different way or different tone. There's also the preposition. I can't remember what the speech participle is, but when you start a sentence, you could say, naturally, we feel that this is a good product. Of course, you might say that this is something that is not what you want. However, we would like to do something different. So what you're doing is you're starting on a sort of a higher pitch, and then you're dropping it and going off in a different direction. And that affects your melody because you're just hitting different frequencies. However, we're going here. Of course, we want to do something like that.
Yeah, well, and I mean, that's drawing particular attention to that pivot, right? I mean, you're making the point basically through your tone that you are shifting gears, that we're moving around.
Yeah.
And so the most important bit of that sentence is that part where you're making that transition so that it's clear and understood that you're making a right turn, for example. I think that's awesome.
There's another tip that I say to people is speak in a complete thought. So if you've got a PowerPoint or if you've got a speech or a script or a whatever, and you're going to talk about blue bananas, red apples, pink pears, and the iPhone, whatever. When you talk about apples and the apples might have a certain speed to it. So I'm going to talk about apples today, ladies and gentlemen. Apples are really amazing fruit. But pears are something that has a little bit of a different flavor. But then we've got bananas. Now, bananas are something. So you choose a topic, a point, and say, okay, at that, when I get there, just going to use a different speed. Slight speed variations on the points.
Well, yeah, and again, just to this idea of tone, I mean, I could feel the difference in those things, right? I mean, so it felt to me that like, okay, well, these are good and those are fine, but bananas, holy crap, this is this is the thing. And so and that was all done by your tone. So I think that illustrated that point really well. What are your thoughts about, like, when it comes to presentation, sort of choosing our content, balancing sort of brevity versus being over verbose? All the way down to, the slide we put on the screen, showing what we're going to say versus maybe just some bullets and speaking sort of from, contemporaneously.
Well, firstly, on slides, less is more. Definitely, you want the least amount of information on the slides, and you want some visual cues as well, because people understand and consume information orally and visually. And I think if you can be concise and brief, that's always the best path or the better way. Especially, I think, if we bring it back to remote work, and if we bring it back to the purpose of your podcast and the reason why we're talking, I think remote meetings are, in terms of our senses, we are hyper-focused because we're looking at a screen with our eyes and we might have headsets on. So a 30-minute meeting is quite heavy on the CPU processing power of our brains, I think. I don't have science to back this up, but this is what I'm feeling. Whereas if you're in an office or around a board table, you could go to the coffee machine, pour some coffee, look out the window, look somewhere else. So you're having a bit of a break in terms of your senses. So in a virtual context, what I'm saying is be melodic, be interesting, and be concise with what you're saying.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And especially where there's, no abundant or no shortage of, free webinars and different things, fighting for our attention day to day. If you can be concise and deliver a clear message and sort of deliver value in the least amount of time possible, I think people will really appreciate you doing that. So can you talk a little bit about sort of the differences then in addressing groups, either on video communications or in person? I imagine there's some crossover, but for purposes of this conversation, maybe more in line with like a Zoom conversation. Let's say you're, a CEO doing a one-on-one with an employee versus a CEO doing a grand speech to the entire company, for example. Like, are there differences in the way that we should be presenting?
I think the intention it's a good question. I think the intention is important. What is your objective and your intention of the conversation, but also the dynamic of the relationship? Obviously, if you are talking to thousands of employees or hundreds of employees, there is a certain intention that you're going to be wanting to give, or some points and markers you're wanting to hit. I think in a one-on-one, you would be slightly more relaxed and a bit loose in the way that you communicate. Body language might be different. It also depends if you've got the webcam on. If you've got the webcam on, generally speaking, in my opinion, with virtual, you have to give, in my opinion, again, this is not backed up by science, this is Alistair Davis's opinion on the matter. You probably got to give about 25% extra in terms of your vocal performance and your physical performance for it to translate through the webcam and the microphone that you're speaking on.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I was even thinking things like, in a one-on-one, you might have the opportunity to drop somebody's name, for example. Hey, Alistair, how are you? Just wanted to follow up with how things are going, for example. Where in a group setting, it might be, hi team, hey, how's everybody? Blah, 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 these kinds of things. And so, in terms of sort of emotional investment, right, the level of sort of buy-in required in a one-on-one situation where you can do little things like, be maybe a little bit more intimate, have a little bit more, focus on one another versus these larger group settings where maybe you as the leader are the primary focus, but you obviously can't stop and address everybody by name.
Yeah, I think what's come up for me in what I do, because I also have a podcast and about remote, loosely aligned to what you're talking about. And the thing is, what's come up for me is the concept of empathy. And because what you don't have in a virtual meeting, or what there is a deficiency or less of, is that connection and that engagement, right? Because as we've said before, we don't have so much of the physical stimuli, the visual stimuli. So we're not getting the usual amount of stimuli to make a decision of whether we like or trust or want to talk to this person. We're only seeing a two-dimensional image, usually from the chest up, and that's it. So there's the concept of empathy, and how do you get that across? And especially when you start your conversation, to make sure that you acknowledge certain things and that you understand the plight or the problems or the situation of your audience or whoever you're talking to, because you want to try and get as many, you want to get as much Velcro going as possible so that you can stick together.
Yeah, no, I think that's perfect. I mean, especially, as we've already discussed in this conversation, the idea of sort of authenticity, starting from a point of intention, making sure we're going into things for the right reason or doing it, for a specific reason. I think that will allow us to sort of emphasize or express our empathy for somebody else if we're in this conversation, on purpose to solve a problem, to, address a concern, or, whatever the issue might be. But coming into it with that intention, I guess, sort of sets us up to be a little bit more empathetic to what's going on with their, on the other end of the call.
Yeah, sure, totally.
So here in the sort of closing few minutes, I wanted to talk just quickly about two other things. First of all, we've alluded to it a lot throughout this conversation. We've actually hit on a few things with our 20% smile and so on, but can we talk about body language in virtual communication? So, I make an active choice sometimes to wave my hands around a little bit, or, do some things like that just to try and make something go on. But I mean, is that the right move? Like, what should we be doing for body communicate, or our sort of to express our body language when all we've got is this top third?
Yeah. So in terms of Hollywood or filming, you want what we call the medium shot. And the medium shot is the shot just below your chest up with a bit of headroom. So that's a medium shot, so that you can have the opportunity to bring hands in, because obviously you want the gestures, some kind of a gesture in, but make sure that if the gestures are up, or you obviously sent a picture, right? But you want to have almost like jazz hands, a little bit higher, and so that you can go 15 to 30 degrees each way. But be careful not to, do your gestures because of perception. You're gonna bring them, so they must be on the same plane as whatever. But I definitely believe that if you can give that kind of a picture to your audience, you're going to give more of yourself and they'll see more of you. You don't want to have like just this head talking on the screen. Hey, what do you want?
Well, and do you think, I mean, does it move the point along to be waving hands around and doing that kind of thing? Or, I mean, because you've seen sort of both ends of that spectrum, right? The people who aren't gestural at all, they're not doing anything, versus the people that are, up in their business the whole time. Like, is there I mean, are there sort of rules of thumb around, how much gesturing we should be doing, or, when it's important, or should we just kind of play it by gut, I guess?
Is there a gesture meter, a gestometer? I think personally, again, there's no science backed up, or maybe there is. Maybe some person at Stanford did a review on gesturing and discovered what the most. I think it's down to the person and what's right for the person. Some gesturing definitely moves points along. Definitely, I believe that you need to have some gesturing. Should it be every second or every second word? No, I don't believe that is good at all. And it also comes down to where you are in the conversation. I don't think you go, hey, Ryan, how's it going? So glad to be here with you. And, you're shaking your hands and going, this is so cool. That's not, but if you're saying, Ryan, I've got this problem. It's like this big and I want to take it from here to there. I think that's appropriate.
Okay. Yeah. So I think that makes sense, that it's just sort of, I don't know, by feel, I suppose. So finally, the last thing, and honestly, this could be a show in and of itself, but this idea about sort of the role that listening plays in verbal communication. So, I mean, obviously, we're spending a lot of time talking about sort of the practical bits of verbal communication. But, the other end of that, or the other part of this sort of two-way street, is the listener. So do you have any thoughts about sort of like listening as it pertains to communication?
Yeah, it's a very good point. Very, very good point. I think it's as important. Obviously I'm biased to the voice, but you need to also listen to the tonal inflections and variations of your speaker and pick up what he or she is saying and feeling, and it's emotional intelligence, understanding, okay, this point, Ryan, is important for Ryan. He's hammering on about this point, so maybe it's important to him. And if somebody does ask you a question, take a moment to think about the answer. Take a moment to breathe, fill up your vocal tank, and then give your answer. I always say that breath is the gas, and I know you say gas in the States. It's the gas to your vocal engine, petrol to your vocal engine here. So you need to breathe, take a beat, then answer.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think sort of, one of the big things that happens, or is a challenge that I see in virtual communication specifically, is distraction. People paying attention to their phone or answering email while so-and-so's talking. Yeah. And maybe that's doable, when there's a public address going on, and maybe it's not critical that you tune in. But especially in a situation like this, one-on-one, or maybe even in a small group where my camera's on and you can see that I'm not paying attention the whole time. I think it's critical that we're, sort of actively engaged in our conversation. And by doing that, it will allow us not only to kind of keep that tennis ball going, to use that metaphor of this back and forth conversation, but also, it allows us, I guess, to sort of pull a little more meaning, or extract a little more meaning out of the conversation.
Yeah.
So
definitely.
In closing, can we talk a little bit about closing and ending conversations so that they continue to be memorable? I wondered if you had just any last minute tips on how to make sure that the thing that you've just talked about, and maybe it's structural, maybe it's the way that we actually give a presentation, for example, but how do we leave people with something of memory, where they can actually go back and go, what, that was a great conversation, or, oh, wow, I really like those blue bananas, or whatever it is. And so, I mean, do you have any thoughts on sort of just closing out conversations effectively?
Yeah. They say that the first and the last are the things that people remember. So again, at the end of the conversations, you're probably going to be speaking at less of a speed. You're not going to be speaking like this right at the end of your conversation, because then people aren't going to remember what you're saying. So again, you might want to drop the tone if you can and say, Ryan, I'm really appreciative of the fact that you had me on your show today. I thought the conversation was awesome, and I thought the questions you asked were amazing. And I just want to thank you for having me on the show. So you have a little bit more of a deliberate way about it. There's a book that I read called Never Split the Difference by Chris Foss, and he talks about the late night FM DJ voice when negotiating, saying that when you negotiate, you need to have the late night FM DJ voice. So Ryan, what are your thoughts on my proposal? It's a low pitch, slow pace, and very little melody, no vocal prosody, no variations, because what you're telling the audience or the listener is that you don't mind asking difficult questions, and you also don't mind hearing difficult answers, because you've got this. You're a rock. You're not going anywhere. So what are your thoughts? Please tell me. It's quite a cool way to, that's a little ninja tip for negotiation.
Yeah, no, I've read that book too, and I love that idea of the late night DJ voice. I mean, he of course is applying it to hostage negotiation, but sales aren't all that different sometimes. So just one last question, and this one's a little bit more formal, but it's just what is one thing that I as an employer could do today to sort of positively affect the way we communicate across our distributed teams? And then to take that one step further, what is something that I as a remote worker could do to improve my communication starting today?
So the manager to teams, and then a single remote worker improving his or her communication.
Correct.
Okay, good questions. I think as a manager to remote teams, the empathy muscle, or the concept of empathy and understanding the plight of people and what they're feeling and experiencing at this time and this moment, is critical. If you can try and start off with a place of commonality, or using things that language and tone that communicates that you care and that you're empathetic to their situation, I think that would resonate well with your employees. So, it's almost like in terms of tone, you're not going to go, "Hey, it was so awesome to be alive right now. Wow, we're going to kill it." It's a case of, I understand we're going through some difficult times, everyone, and we want to understand. I'm here with you. In terms of a singular remote worker, I think totally the ninja tip that you can use is that 20% smile, melody, and volume. Write that down, put it on your PowerPoint, put it on your piece of paper. I can't tell you how many people I see, on free webinars and whatever, and they start the conversation and there's just zero warmth, nothing going on. It's like they've just been to a funeral. And, you don't know who you're talking to. That person might have had 18 hours of virtual meetings, and now they've got to listen to you, and you come on this Zoom call and you talking like an undertaker. So, just bring the warmth, bring the energy, bring the warmth, and, you'll get it back. You'll get it back.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think you dropped the term a few minutes ago, but this idea of emotional intelligence. And I think that so much of what we're doing here, is related to that as a concept. So that's awesome. So to just put a bow on this thing, where can people learn more about the work you're doing, maybe get involved or reach out to you if they'd like to try and get in touch?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ryan. I'm on LinkedIn. That's Jabba Training is the company, Jabba. It's like Jabba the Hutt, but it's not. So Jabba Training. And my website is jabba.io. So jabba.io. Yeah, email me or reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm always on LinkedIn these days. My website will be refreshed at the end of the month. So it's quite it's a little bit old and static. So we're going to get a new one at the end of the month, which is going to be delightful.
Yeah, well, it happens. But we'll make sure to include all those links and everything in the show notes so that people can reach out. And thanks, Alistair, so much for doing this. I really appreciate you.
No, thanks for having me on the show, Ryan. It was awesome. Great questions. I could see that you were prepared. And it's always nice to be on a show where the host is ready.
Well, I do my level best. So anyway, thank you to you, Alistair, and then to everybody who tunes in this week and every week. And we'll see you all next time.
I don't owe you anything. I don't know you